Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Hello and welcome to We Need to Talk About on GB News with me, Alex Phillips, where we get stuck into the issues that we should be looking at in depth. Nothing is off the table and nobody will be cancelled for saying what they think. Keeping me company today is political commentator Benedict Spence, and here's what we've got coming up on the show. With the Met Police asking for Sue Gray's highly anticipated report to make minimal reference to Downing Street events under investigation, what next? Could this be a reprieve for beleaguered Boris? The US has warned that Russia could invade Ukraine next month. But could we be at the risk of Moscow-coordinated cyber attacks on our critical infrastructure as we continue to ship weapons to Kiev? And as a university issues a trigger warning for Harry Potter over fears of difficult conversations on gender, the Equality and Human Rights Commission seemed to be on the side of biological sex, telling Scotland to halt plans over gender self-ID. That's what we're talking about for the next hour, but what do you need to talk about? Email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or tweet me @gbnews. But first, it's time for GB News headlines.
Good afternoon, it's 1 minute past 2. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. The Met Police has asked Sue Gray to make minimal reference to the Downing Street events it's investigating. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer says the government has been paralysed by the report, which has yet to be published. Its findings could potentially trigger a vote of no confidence in the Prime Minister. The force isn't calling for any delays, but confirmed it's in contact with the Cabinet Office to avoid any prejudice in its investigation. Scotland's Secretary of State Ian Murray told GB News it's hard to keep up with Boris Johnson's version of events.
It calls into question the Prime Minister in terms of the ministerial code in line to Parliament. And the very fact the Metropolitan Police are talking about 8 parties. The Prime Minister said there were no parties, then he said he didn't attend parties, then he said he didn't think they were parties but work events, and now we're up to the latest excuse of the Prime Minister being ambushed by his own birthday cake. It's become farcical, and it would be like a play, a funny play, if it wasn't so serious for the country.
The national insurance hike is going ahead, according to government ministers, despite reports the Prime Minister's considering its delay. Conservative MPs are among the voices calling for the increase in April to be dropped as families struggle because of the rise in the cost of living. Number 10 says there are no plans to scrap the rise. The Russian president has told his French counterpart Moscow's main security concerns over Ukraine have not been addressed. Vladimir Putin held the talks with Emmanuel Macron today following the US and NATO's response to the Russian proposals. It says the Kremlin sent its strongest signal so far that it's willing to engage with US security proposals and reiterated it doesn't want a war. 100,000 Russian troops have amassed on the border of Ukraine in recent weeks, stoking fears of an imminent invasion. British companies are being warned to strengthen their digital defences following malicious online attacks in Ukraine. The National Cybersecurity Centre says the incidents bear the hallmarks of Russian activity. No current threats have been identified in the UK, but guidance has been updated to ensure businesses stay ahead of potential threats. A senior civil servant has apologised for misleading MPs over the evacuation of animals in Afghanistan. Sir Philip Barton told the Foreign Affairs Committee that the Prime Minister's Special Representative for Afghanistan, Nigel Casey, had not been told about the intervention. However, recent emails show Mr Casey did ask Number 10 for guidance on what they wanted to be done with the Nowzad animal charity. The UK has pledged a further £97 million of emergency aid for Afghanistan. That's after the government promised to double financial support following the Taliban's takeover last summer. It brings the total to £286 million this financial year. The money's being used to buy food, water and sanitation facilities. Nearly 50,000 people have now signed a petition to stop a driver from being charged with murder. The man known as Abraham reportedly tried to stop a stabbing in West London by driving into the attacker. He was arrested and has been released on bail while police continue their investigation. The driver's lawyer, Mohammed Akunji, told GBNews his client's actions go beyond everyday bravery.
Well, it makes him a person who was acting fully in accordance with the law, which was in the self-defense of another, in fact, others. And we say that's quite squarely and quite obviously a person who's a hero, who's put himself in between harm's way, somebody who is effecting a savage attack on people. And he put himself between that person and innocent people.
An antiviral pill for those most at risk of serious COVID infection will be rolled out across the NHS next month. The government has announced the UK's second antiviral tablet, known as Paxlovid, will be made available to thousands of people with weakened immune systems from mid-February. Studies suggest the drug made by Pfizer can cut the risk of hospital admission or death by 88% if given in the first 5 days of symptoms. And the government's pledging to make British Sign Language a recognised language. It's hoped a new bill will improve access for deaf people and promote its use during public announcements. Labour MP Rosie Cooper addressed the Commons earlier and spoke about the personal significance this bill has.
For every deaf person like my parents who've been ignored, misunderstood, or even treated as unintelligent for simply relying on BSL, this recognition will be clear and will be a message that their language is equal and should be treated as equal.
This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now back to Alex and We Need to Talk About.
When Labour MP Neil Coyle shopped the PM to the cops, I bet his boss thought they'd got him. There we were, all poised for the Grey report, but now the whole thing might be toast. The police have spiked Sue's snooping by saying it will hamper their own investigation. It all sounds a bit fishy to me, especially as, when you think about it, the police have been put in a bit of a pickle. Surely one of the most guarded places in London is Number 10, so Downing Street bobbies are either incompetent or complicit. You would have thought that the former Director of Public Prosecutions and the former head of the Crown Prosecution Service, that's right, Sir Keir Starmer, would know exactly which levers to pull. But the damning report that would have likely put paid to Boris has now been sunk in a scrabble of police panic. You would have thought that Captain Hindsight would have learned his lesson. His cynical schemes whipping up protracted frenzies in Parliament, making the country look like a basket case, didn't work over Brexit and might have just blown up in his face yet again in another case of Keir Karma. Well, joining me now is GB News political correspondent Tom Harwood. So, Tom, explain all of this. Why is it that the police are doubling down and saying to Sue Gray, please don't publish reports about events in Downing Street that we're now investigating?
Well, the whole statement this morning that was released by the Metropolitan Police revolved around the concept of prejudicing their investigation. Now, it's unclear exactly why the Sue Gray investigation would prejudice the Metropolitan Police investigation, but there are a number of potential theories. For example, if the Metropolitan Police investigation was rather more serious than some people were thinking, if it were to, for example, involve something that could go to trial by jury, then that could be prejudiced by something that is in the Sue Gray report. The long and short of it is that the 8 events, parties, whatever we want to call them, that took place across Whitehall and are alleged to have taken place in Downing Street as well, those 8 events that are being investigated by the Metropolitan Police can now no longer in full be explored in the Sue Gray inquiry until the Metropolitan Police have completed their investigation. Now, that means that Sue Gray has only 2 options, really. Number one, she strips out a whole load of her report and publishes a hobbled, half-baked version of it this next week, or she holds the whole thing off and keeps her report in the way that it was originally written and waits to publish it until after the Metropolitan Police have completed their investigation. The problem with that, of course, though, is that police investigations do take time. It could take months, it could take the best part of a year for the Metropolitan Police to conduct their investigation. That's, of course, how long it took the last time the Metropolitan Police investigated something going on in Number 10 back in 2006 when the police investigated the Blair government and Cash for Honours. Of course, that scandal predated by not that long Tony Blair's resignation. Although the political consequences of the Metropolitan Police involving now may well be the inverse. It certainly seems to have diffused the situation, at least in the short term, and bought the Prime Minister some time.
It does seem rather strange, doesn't it, Tom? The idea that the Sue Gray report could prejudice an investigation that, you know, might result in trial by jury, when what we're looking at here are basically COVID-fixed penalty notices, which end up in a magistrate's court if they're not paid, if it goes to the very conclusion. So something just doesn't seem right to me.
Well, the interesting point here is the only way the investigation, the police investigation, would end up in something that would require a jury is if it's not just investigating some breaches of COVID regulations, but is too investigating the potential cover-up, for example, of breaches of COVID regulations. If what it turns out is going on is the police are, for example, and this is just speculation, of course, none of this is known, but if what it turns out the police are doing might end up investigating deleting emails or covering up evidence in some sort of way, that would be a rather heavier charge and something that could take it a lot further than the minor fixed penalty notices or fines that we were discussing in previous days.
I mean, given it was the Labour Party's decision to report these goings-on to the Metropolitan Police, what's been their reaction to this?
Well, it's interesting. A lot of the opposition politicians who were calling for the police to be involved are now really bemoaning the consequences of the police being involved. I think it was Sir Ed Davey, the leader of the Liberal Democrats, who was one of the first people to call for the police investigation, and now he is really very much criticising how this is all being delayed. Indeed, the Labour Party much the same. It's a very messy situation. It's hard to overstate how little people have known and how information has come out in drips and drabs, sometimes in ways that contradict each other, these pieces of information over the last 3 days. Of course, we're talking about different organisations of government talking to one another and some denying that they're talking to each other. Number 10 saying that they're not talking to the police or the Cabinet Office about this, and the Cabinet Office saying that they're talking to the police, and the police saying that they're talking to the Sue Gray investigation that's under the auspices of the Cabinet Office. You've got this sort of triangle involved of various different arms of the state, all investigating one another, talking to one another, or not talking to one another. And it's no wonder that there's been some mixed communication and some crossed wires over the last few days. But really, the question now lies in what will Sue Gray decide to do? Will she release this hobbled version of her report next week? And would that be enough to persuade MPs to think that something bad's gone on, or will MPs be then waiting for what the police have to say anyway? And will, in that case, Sue Gray think it's best to just wait until the police have concluded their investigation? So many open questions, not that much light, but a hell of a lot going on.
Yeah, there is indeed. Thank you so much, Tom. Well, let's take a look at some of the most damaging party claims and how they've been reported in the papers. Let's jog your memory, shall we? The Guardian published a photo of multiple Downing Street staff, including the Prime Minister and his now wife, appearing to socialise with wine in May 2020. 5 days later, the infamous Bring Your Own Bottle party, where over 200 staff were allegedly invited, and the PM was there for nearly half an hour. Carrie Johnson was pictured with a friend in September 2020, days before Mr. Johnson had told the public to keep their distance from those they didn't live with. Then, the Christmas parties. First, the PM was revealed to have hosted a quiz while seated with colleagues, clearly in a festive mood. Then, as revealed by ITV, Number 10 staff were caught on camera joking about a Christmas party attended by around 40 people. Perhaps most damning of all, the evening before Prince Philip's funeral last year, when those iconic images of the Queen sitting alone to mourn, 2 raucous parties were held inside Number 10. Well, I'm delighted to be joined in the studio today by political commentator Benedict Spence. Benedict, has Keir Starmer overplayed his hand a little bit? It's all kind of blown up in his face, hasn't it?
I don't think you could go as far as to say that Keir Starmer has overplayed his hand, simply because I don't think this saves Boris Johnson. I think it just buys him a bit of time. But in reality, he's still essentially a lame duck Prime Minister up until the point at which the Conservative Party finds a viable alternative. That's the only thing that's sort of keeping him in power, is this strange reluctance from MPs themselves to bite the bullet and get rid of the Prime Minister, perhaps because they don't feel confident that there is another candidate out there that could take on the mantle and could rescue them from this rather toxic situation, which is a pretty damning indictment of the state of the party. But, would certainly explain why it is that they're not making any moves at this moment. For now, we're just sort of left in limbo, as Tom just said. Police investigations can take a very long time, but the very fact that there is a police investigation and that there are elements of the Sue Gray report which, let's be clear, all the pundits saying, well, why isn't it being released? They don't know what it is that the police have asked to be redacted at this moment. The fact that there could be something very significant that could potentially involve a trial rather than just a fixed penalty, that is far more damaging than what Boris Johnson was facing before. Even if nothing can be proven, the mere suggestion that that could exist is, I think, actually very damaging for him.
Do you think something that's actually criminal could exist?
I wouldn't put it past anybody, frankly, in any walk of life that something criminal could exist. We don't know at this moment in time. But, we do need to remember, this morning a lot of people were saying, I see absolutely no reason why this report could prejudice a police investigation. And then about an hour later, all of these very clever lawyers and pundits on Twitter all did a sort of volte-face and went, oh, hang on, actually, yes, we can. And this makes a great deal of sense, because if you are the police, you don't want it to be that you provide the people that you may or may not be investigating with a complete set of all the evidence, and you give them a couple of weeks to corroborate all of their stories and get their stories straight before you then get the opportunity to interview them. That, I think, is probably the most logical explanation. But as I say, we don't know just yet. We don't know what it is the police have asked Sue Gray to redact, and we will have to wait for that.
But surely this has put the Metropolitan Police in a slight bit of difficulty, hasn't it? First of all, it's now the police who are going to be responsible for bringing down the Prime Minister or not. And secondly, as I said in my introduction, Downing Street is a very fortified place with plenty of coppers. So are they useless or were they complicit?
Are they useless? Well, that's a question that we've been asking ourselves for a very long time, isn't it? Throughout the pandemic, be it the policing of vigils, the policing of Black Lives Matter protests, or just the policing of coronavirus restrictions themselves. A lot of questions have been asked about the fitness of those running the Metropolitan Police. So I don't really think that this... It doesn't necessarily add too much more fuel to the fire. There were already serious questions about police reform going forward. Really, in this position, actually, I'm the first to say that I don't believe the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police should be in her job. But I think she's damned if she does and damned if she doesn't in this situation. The whole point of us investigating what's going on at Downing Street is based on the premise that the Prime Minister and his staff are no better than the rest of us. They should be treated the same as the rest of us. You can't then have it that the police then ignore their own rules because suddenly they're not the same as the rest of us. They're a special case. It's the Prime Minister in number 10. You can't have it both ways. And so actually I don't really see that in this situation, if they've not yet reached a position where they can bring forward a charge or expedite their investigation, that they could have done anything differently.
But this is going to make Partygate drag on for ages, isn't it? And we're like a laughing stock in the world right now.
I don't think most of the rest of the world is paying attention because of what's happening in Europe and Asia right now. But for those that are, yes, it looks absolutely nuts. But that is the situation that we've got ourselves into. And I say that we've got ourselves into, that our Prime Minister has got himself into. Let's be very clear here. All the people talking about it being a conspiracy against Boris Johnson, people who hate Boris Johnson, yeah, sure, there's a lot of that going on. But we wouldn't be in this position if Boris Johnson hadn't introduced these rules. And let's be clear, he was the one that passed them, he knew what they were, and then broke them, and then it has been suggested might have lied, might have tried to cover up. This is very much a him problem. And so, as a country, we do need to step back and say, well, whatever your political views are, whatever your Brexit allegiances, whatever your Conservative allegiances, you do have to say, who is it who's got us into this situation? It is Boris Johnson. Now, whether or not he believes he has and he should resign, that's a matter for him. I don't necessarily think that he should if he believes that he hasn't. It's now a matter for the Conservative Party. For how much longer can they actually stand this embarrassment? Because right now, they just look like the Boris Johnson show. Do they have the backbone to say, actually, no, we're not just this man's personal fiefdom. We can act independently, and we are interested in what our constituents have to say, because some constituents still back Boris Johnson, but an awful lot of them don't. And as was said throughout the last 2 years, a lot of Labour voters, former Labour voters, have lent the Conservatives their vote over Boris Johnson and are more than prepared to take it back if they think he's broken the law.
But do you think that this showers the Labour Party in glory with their sort of constant side-swiping about it and launching police investigations? I don't get the impression that voters think that's particularly cricket either.
I don't think the voters think too well of the Labour Party, but I think simply by being sidelined and being a sort of a sideshow, I think it's, for much of the pandemic, the Labour Party were effectively an irrelevance. But again, Boris Johnson has made this a central issue, not because they're any good, but because now we're looking for an alternative. Well, who else is there? There's Keir Starmer or somebody else within the Tory party. The Tory party aren't prepared to put somebody else up against Boris Johnson, so that means we have to then listen to what Keir Starmer says. Whether or not he'd make a good Prime Minister is beside the point. This current one is not covering himself in glory.
Yeah, well, no one's covered themselves in glory, it seems. What a pickle it is indeed. I want to know your views on this. Do you think the police should be involved? Do you think there's crimes going on? Has Keir Starmer perhaps got his karma by overplaying his hand? Email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or, of course, you can tweet us at GBNews. Well, you're with GB News on TV and on DAB radio, of course. It's time for a short break now and a check on the weather forecast.
Hello again. It's been a pretty quiet January so far, but our weather is set to turn more unsettled as we head through this weekend. Through Friday, still got some sunshine around, but those skies clouding over and those winds turning stronger. And that's because this high pressure slides away and we see these tightening isobars starting to push their way in. So a wetter and windier picture of weather to come as we go through the next couple of days. Out there at the moment, though, we've got plenty of sunshine across eastern areas. The sky is turning a little bit hazy through the afternoon as we see that cloud pushing in from the west. But elsewhere, rather cloudy through much of the afternoon with some outbreaks of rain pushing in across the west of Scotland. The wind's beginning to pick up here, and that's a sign of things to come. Temperatures on the mild side, though, 11s and 12s under the cloud, 9 or 10 where we've got sunnier skies and some sunshine around through much of the day. Now, as we go through this evening and overnight, skies turn cloudy for most places. Some drizzly bits of pieces of rain in western areas, but that wet weather and windier weather becomes more dominant across Scotland. So we are going to see some pretty gusty conditions, a wind warning in force across Scotland. We'll see some pretty squally gales to push their way through with that heavy rain, but it does stay mild overnight. As we go into Saturday then, that's when the winds really start to ramp up. We'll see some very gusty conditions for western Scotland through the central belt over towards eastern Scotland as well. Could be some damaging gusts of winds here. Stay tuned to the latest forecast. This weather front drives its way southwards. We'll see brighter and blustery conditions following in behind some wintry showers over higher ground and feeling quite cool with those strong and gusty winds, even though temperatures may get to 13 across the far south. That cloud and rain eventually clears the far southwest of Cornwall as we go through the early hours, and then clearer skies following on behind means that as those winds ease, we will see a touch of frost into Sunday. But the weather is set to turn yet more unsettled again on Sunday with another deep area of low pressure pushing in. Bye-bye for now.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Welcome back. Now, we all know the Russians love a good cyber attack, compromising the security and smooth running of a country by zapping critical systems. So it's hardly a revelation that Putin has a load of KGB keyboard warriors poised to strike his enemies, which very much includes us. Not only can they cause an energy crisis by making gas prices soar, they can probably attempt to black out power stations, as they did in Ukraine in 2015. But that's okay. It's not like we opened up a load of critical infrastructure to dubious characters like, I don't know, Putin's commie comrades China. Oh, except that we did. That's okay. We can slap a load of sanctions on Putin and his pals to stop him in his tracks. It's not like he has a load of rubles stashed away with dodgy oligarchs. Well, except he does. All over London. It's no wonder US and UK spooks are pulling their hair out at the failure of successive British governments to future-proof our national security. Well, political commentator Benedict Spence is still with me. How worried should we be? I mean, we're not in Putin's good books, are we?
We should be terrified, actually. I'm not trying to be sensationalist or anything like that, but you're right. We have successfully failed over the last sort of 20 years, since the end of the Cold War, 30 years, to take Russia seriously as a military threat, even as a sort of a country in itself. Famously, in the mid-90s, I think there was an Atlantic front cover that said Russia is finished as a world power. Well, isn't that hilarious in hindsight? As you say, we've allowed Russian companies to sort of monopolize much of the energy supply to Eastern Europe. We've allowed Chinese companies access to all kinds of infrastructure. And of course, Vladimir Putin has managed to ferret about $200 billion out of the country in Western countries like London, other places, Germany, Switzerland, the United States. You know, they've had a great old time plundering the country, setting it all up for this situation. And now we find ourselves with hundreds of thousands of Russian troops on the borders of Ukraine. Not just Ukraine, on the borders of Poland, on the borders of Lithuania, and we're not prepared to do anything about it because Ukraine isn't in NATO. So we're actually prepared to just sacrifice a vast country, a very geostrategically important country, because it's not actually on the piece of paper that we don't actually have any sort of legal obligations to it, and we're just going to let, for all the talk Putin has about NATO coming closer to the borders of Russia, we're going to let Putin potentially push Russia's borders right up to NATO. Isn't it fantastic?
I mean, NATO in the last hour, the Secretary General have come out and warned that that Russia's now deploying thousands of combat-ready troops into Belarus.
There were already 30,000 Russian troops in Belarus before this announcement, which suggests that it was these are the troops that were to the east of the Dnieper River, but on the Russian-Belarusian border, which now means that there are 60,000 troops. That directly threatens Kiev, the capital. It also threatens cities sort of to the west, which would prevent anybody from potentially helping to liberate Kiev were it taken. This is a very important geostrategic move, but you've also got to bear in mind it's not just Ukraine that's under threat. Where else does Belarus border? Lithuania and Poland. The Suwalski Gap that separates Belarus from the Kaliningrad Oblast. There are a lot of troops there as well. It is a long-term geostrategic objective of Russia to unite that part of Europe with Belarus so that it isn't cut off. And that would be a very serious move, actually, were it to be that NATO troops were drawn into this conflict, which they might be, given that countries like the Czech Republic, for example, which is in NATO, have said if Ukraine requests military assistance, they're prepared to do it, whatever other NATO countries say. That's the danger of the situation that we face here. And I think it really does show you the sort of the level of panic in London, in Berlin, in New York, that there is no sort of joined up thinking on this, that actually we're sort of relying on Eastern and Central European countries to do a lot of our dirty work for us and potentially allowing Russia free rein over this part of the world.
Yeah, why Germany sits back and hums a tune, it seems. Well, meanwhile, US President Joe Biden has warned there is a distinct possibility that Russia might invade Ukraine next month. He's warned the US could personally impose sanctions, but some American officials reportedly fear that they may be ineffective. Well, I'm now joined by freelance reporter Emil Filtenborg, who's in Ukraine. Emil, what is the situation like there on the ground? Are people beginning to panic, especially at news of these troops moving into Belarus?
Well, that's very divided over the entire country of Ukraine, which is an enormous country. In the east of Ukraine, where I'm now, people are not very concerned about this. They have been living with a war for 8 years, so they don't take much note of these new warning signs of an impending military escalation. However, in Kiev, we see loads of signs of anxiety, and people are starting to worry. People are starting to prepare for an attack, starting to make plans for how to get out from Kiev if Kiev would fall under attack. So it's really a matter of geography.
I mean, we keep hearing talk of America saying, oh, we're going to slam really big sanctions on you. But countries like Germany are saying, well, no, don't do that. Don't involve the SWIFT system, because that will have a detrimental effect on us with rising energy prices. They're so dependent, of course, on Russian gas. Has Putin essentially just won the game of chess and outsmarted everyone?
Well, he has at least demonstrated that there are enormous cracks in the European the European Union as a unit, and the Western European countries as partners, since we have no unified response to this. So in a way, he has already gained a lot of momentum in these negotiations, and he has been able to get negotiations. He has been able to get negotiations with Russia on his terms. So in that sense, it has been a victory for Putin. But it's not something that we can say he has won the chess game already, but he is definitely in a better position right now.
In eastern Ukraine, is there actually a bit of sympathy towards Putin and perhaps a few people there who wouldn't mind rolling out the welcome wagon for him?
That's probably a bit of a stretch. I mean, there are people here who support Russia, people who are pro-Russian. There are a lot of people who are indifferent to what flag will fly above them, but the majority are pro-Ukrainian and want Ukraine to be the nation they want, their areas in Donbass back. They want the occupied Crimean Peninsula back. So the majority are pro-Ukrainian, and we have seen a shift since 2014, where people have been gradually less and less pro-Russian in all of Ukraine, including eastern Ukraine.
Emil, thank you so much for joining me today. And let's stay in touch, because this is not going to de-escalate anytime soon, I'm sure. And it's absolutely brilliant to be able to have someone live in Ukraine right now telling us what the situation is. That was Emil Filtenborg. Look, I want to know what you think about this. Does it bother you that Russia might be about to send tanks, troops, the works into Ukraine? Should we be getting involved? I mean, Britain, of course, is almost leading the way when it comes to the global response to this. Does that put us under threat? Email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or, of course, tweet me at gbnews. You're with GB News on TV and DAB radio. Coming up, we'll be talking about Afghanistan and the growing humanitarian crisis there. The West is really outdoing itself on foreign policy this year, isn't it? Now, it's time for a check on the news headlines with Rhiannon.
It's 2:32. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. The Met Police has asked Sue Gray to make minimal reference to the events it's investigating. Her inquiry into alleged Downing Street parties during lockdown was due to be released this week. The force isn't calling for any further delays, but confirmed it's in contact with the Cabinet Office to avoid any prejudice in the investigation. The national insurance hike is going ahead. That's according to government ministers, despite reports the Prime Minister is considering a U-turn. Conservative MPs are among the voices calling for the increase in April to be scrapped as families struggle because of the rise in the cost of living. A senior civil servant has apologised for misleading MPs over the evacuation of animals in Afghanistan. Sir Philip Barton told the Foreign Affairs Committee that the Prime Minister's special representative for Afghanistan hadn't been told about the intervention. Recent emails, though, show Nigel Casey did ask Number 10 for guidance on what they wanted to be done with the Nowzad animal charity. NATO says we must be prepared for a wide range of aggressions against Ukraine, but they say that doesn't necessarily mean a heavy military attack. That's as the Russian President Vladimir Putin held talks with his French counterpart Emmanuel Macron earlier on security proposals over Ukraine. 100,000 Russian troops have amassed on the border of Ukraine in recent weeks, sparking fears of an imminent invasion. The government has announced the UK's second antiviral tablet, known as Paxlovid, will be available to thousands of people with weakened immune systems from mid-February. Studies suggest the drug, made by Pfizer, can cut the risk of hospital admission or death by 88% if given in the first 5 days of symptoms. That's it. We'll have more news at the top of the hour. See you then.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world. If
you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Welcome back to We Need to Talk About. This is GB News and I'm Alex Phillips. As the West's foreign policy disaster in Afghanistan plays out, ghoulish reports of parents selling their children and impoverished families desperately harvesting their organs reveal the horrifying crisis left behind, with the moral quandary of having to help prop up a regime the US and UK spent 20 years fighting by either dropping sanctions or sending aid to halt a humanitarian disaster. Pashtana Durrani's family fled Afghanistan to escape the Taliban. Growing up in a refugee camp, she was able to attend school, and when she returned, went to a college specifically for girls where her mum and aunt were teachers, while her dad, a tribal leader, advocated for the education for girls that the Taliban deny. She later set up her non-profit Learn to provide emergency relief for women and children facing malnutrition and starvation. Pashtana was forced into hiding, moving from location to location as the Taliban took over the country before managing to escape to America last year. I'm humbled to say this remarkable woman joins me now. Pashtana, thank you so much for joining me. I mean, what is your reaction to what you're hearing now coming out of Afghanistan?
Thank you so much. Thank you for the kind introduction. I'm devastated. It's my country. We are supposed to, the world is supposed to stand with Afghanistan because the world has already abused Afghanistan for the past 40 years for its own wars, for its own politics. And even right now, Afghanistan is being abused for the world politics, for Western politics. It breaks my heart that my people are suffering because of Western politics.
And what are you able to do from America to help? I mean, it's remarkable, your personal story. Do you feel hopeless, or are there things you are being able to do to help especially women and girls back home?
I mean, I'm going to be honest. I do everything. Every morning I wake up and every day is a new challenge. We have meals distribution for hospitals right now where we are feeding infants and mothers because the mothers are starving. So the babies are starving and they're not producing enough milk to actually feed the baby. So we are having a meal distribution right now. We are focusing on family sponsorship kits where we are providing a family with kids all over Afghanistan right now. And apart from that, we are providing food assistance, we are providing healthcare assistance, we are providing educational assistance. But then at the end of the day, one always has to think and see that there were elected officials who left Afghanistan, and then there are elected officials who actually messed up Afghanistan, and nobody is holding them accountable. And then there is a regime that is not even elected, and the world is just watching them.
What on earth do you think can happen now? Is it time the West actually went back in and said, you're not Taliban 2.0, you're no different from the Taliban before? Should we be stripping sanctions? Should we be sending in aid?
I think one thing I have learned is military intervention never works, and not especially in countries like Afghanistan. We have to understand that there has to be smart sanctions. Taliban members are traveling freely. Why are they traveling freely? There should be smart sanctions on their travel. There should be financial sanctions on them, on that group, including the ex-government people who are right now roaming freely with the aid money that they stole from Afghanistan. But the people of Afghanistan don't deserve that. The people of Afghanistan deserve a task force that is dedicated to them to work and provide assistance not only in healthcare but education, but in economic crisis right now. And they need to be able to feed their family, get back to their jobs, have a shelter over their head. And for that, I think the West needs to have a smart suggestions. And I'm afraid what the West is doing right now is just washing its hands, saying, oh, we donated to the UN, but UN is swimming in the money, but not doing anything in Afghanistan. What has the UN done? Give me single figure that proves that UN UN is working in Afghanistan, it has done an amazing job. It has saved, like, let's say 100 babies. It has saved 100 women. Nothing as the UN has done in the past 4 to 5 months that proves that they are capable of running Afghanistan. So why put your trust in the UN? Why not let the Afghanistan of people breathe for once? Why is the world choking Afghanistan and thinking, oh, they're doing enough because they're sending aid or putting sanctions on the Taliban? Taliban don't care if you put sanctions on them.
And I mean, I understand that you fled in October to America. How quickly did the situation deteriorate? How under threat were you?
I'm going to be honest, I stayed there for quite some time, a very long time. The only reason I had to leave was because I graduated in May and I couldn't continue my studies there because I need to be graduating from an actual university in person. The second thing that is more important for me was that I was able to work, and that's something that I was not able to do. I'm not able to go to my own office. I'm not able to visit and work with my co-workers. So how can I work in Afghanistan when I'm not allowed to do the specific thing, which is education and my work? And that is the reason I had to leave. And now that I am here, I'm able to help twice as much as I could in Afghanistan.
Pashtana, thank you so much for talking to me. You're a remarkable woman. I can see entirely why people draw comparisons between you and Malala. I mean, you're a heroine, so keep up the good work. Pashtana Durrani there, honoured to have her on the programme. Well, Benedict, what are your thoughts on this? It was a huge foreign policy failure, wasn't it? That sort of manic withdrawal of troops. Of course, we've got the other chapter of Pen Farthing's animals now. But we've left not just a mess and basically, turned back 20 years and trillions of dollars and lost lives in defeating this regime. But these stories of parents being forced to sell children and people harvesting their own organs,
it's what happens when you go into a country and you are actually very successful militarily. Let's not forget, the Taliban were ousted from power for a very long time, but you don't actually work very well to rebuild the country or its economy, and it becomes a country whose economy is entirely dependent on aid. And then you leave, and then you cut all the aid, and then you add the sanctions on what few industries there are there. It was entirely predictable that this would happen. And realistically, as much as nobody wants to do a deal with the Taliban, we have essentially already done plenty of deals with the Taliban by giving them back the country and, incidentally, we've also armed them, which, at this point, sending food aid and that sort of thing sort of seems like the least we could do to the people who the West have abandoned to this dreadful fate. Ultimately, otherwise, what will happen is a lot of the people who do not necessarily want to live under the Taliban will become incredibly desperate, and there's only really sort of two outlets for them. One is to become Taliban members themselves for the young men and become radicalized. And, as we've all seen in the past, that always works out really well for the West. The other is to anticipate and brace a mass exodus of people from Afghanistan, which, again, the West has demonstrated it's not interested in taking these people. And they're not going to go to Pakistan. They're not going to go to China. They're not going to go to Central Asia or Iran. That's where they're going to end up, is coming to Europe. The alternative to those things, I'm afraid, is sending them money. And as much as, I say money, food, essentially, medical equipment, not actually just giving the Taliban cash, but the actual tangible things that the people need. Because that's the only way you can kind of keep the people treading water, keep their heads above water. Otherwise, you are just compounding what is already a dreadful situation of allowing this military theocracy back into the country and totally embarrassing yourselves, which, as we've already touched upon earlier on the programme, has had knock-on effects for the West's own credibility abroad with regards to things like Russia and China.
I mean, Pashtana there was pretty damning of the UN's response to all of this. So what should we be doing in the West? Is anybody capable or willing to actually go and help these people out?
I don't think anybody is really prepared to put their necks on the line. And most governments actually don't want to deal with the Taliban. It's just a bit of a PR disaster. It's ethically, we don't want to do it. But you do need to, I'm afraid, people in the West need to recognize that these are the people who now control this country. And they can sell the country to the highest bidder. If they want to deal with China, they want to deal with Russia, they want to deal with Pakistan or Iran, probably not Iran, but if they want to, they can. It's ultimately, as wicked as it may seem, we are the ones that have allowed this to be the case, so we have to deal with the consequences. We need it to be that the country is at least functioning, that there aren't people starving, that people aren't sort of descending into extremism, that extreme measures aren't their only route out. And that means sending them aid, that means sending them food, that means sending them medical equipment, technology. A lot of people will say things like education. Well, ultimately, let's park that, because the short-term issue, as you say, is food. Not textbooks or anything like that. People just need to eat so that they don't have to, as you say, sell off family members, sell off body parts, or try to flee the country. that's the ultimate situation that we're facing this winter. Does anybody have the wherewithal to do it? Does anybody have the compunction to do it? I don't know, but it is morally what we should be doing.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. What a horrific state of affairs we have created. Well, you've been emailing us your views throughout the show today on various topics. Phil says, love him or hate him, there is no alternative to Boris within or without the Conservative Party. So as it stands, he would still get my vote. There you are, Boris. Phil likes you. May says, if the opposition stopped their childish antics and hoping to get Keir Starmer into power, the government could get on with real problems like the Russian threat and the economy. Do you know what, May? I pretty much agree with you there. Joan says, I will be standing by Boris Johnson. There is no alternative, certainly not Keir Starmer and the Labour Party. Well, yeah, they've hardly showered themselves with glory, have they? They just seem to like playing games rather than letting people get on with the job of, I don't know, running the country. Now, the latest in the infantilisation of society by organisations that, frankly, should know better, has seen the English department at the University of Chester put trigger warnings on Harry Potter. Yep. Apparently, the children's book about a wizard could lead to difficult conversations about gender, race, sexuality, class and identity. The university has clearly jumped on the JK bashing bandwagon after the author stood up for the importance of recognising biological sex, which is something the Equality and Human Rights Commission, the highest authority in the land on this, you would think, also appear to defend, having told Scotland that plans to steamroll through provisions to make it easy for people to change their sex on their birth certificate could have serious consequences on data, on sports, on barriers facing women and the criminal justice system. Yet, of course, the ever-rabid charity Stonewall has had the audacity to call the Commission's findings deeply troubling and anti-trans. You couldn't make it up. I'm delighted now to be joined by founder of Standing for Women, Kelly J. Keane. Kelly, what are your thoughts on this? I mean, it's just the latest round of people wanting to have a go at J.K. Rowling.
Well, what a crazy contradiction and weird world we're living in, that you've just covered Afghanistan and people having to sell their children and organs, and genuine crisis to a privileged, entitled group of babies in a university who apparently can't read books. It's so grotesque, actually. It really is getting just unacceptable. I don't know why more people aren't angry about it. I find it quite infuriating. I think lots of people in education, right from primary school teachers to university academics, are just either cowards or they are sucked into this cult or they are benefiting from this cult. But it's just such a load of lies, and I'm sick and tired of hearing such nonsense. And the EHRC, to be fair, has been very, very late and quite weak on this entire issue. So I do think some of the blame lies with them.
I mean, there are some green shoots of hope, though. At least they've turned around and said to Scotland, hold your horses. This whole gender self-ID business where people can just say, oh, I was actually born a woman when they weren't, this is going to have serious implications. They haven't gone as far as say, don't do this. They've just said, stop, pause, have a think. Do you think that they will be listened to, or do you think that Sturgeon will just trammel through this legislation anyway to be on the side of the trendy woke?
I mean, I don't know. I think in a few years' time, when we look back and find out what threads were flowing through Sturgeon during this time, I think it will answer many questions about what on earth she's doing. But Scotland are hell-bent on trying to get some accolade for being the wokest nation on earth. I don't know if they're going to stop doing that. If I was in Scotland, I'd be more worried about child poverty, to be honest, than woke pronouns and so on.
Yeah, and one last thing, the Penn University trans swimmer is back in the newspapers again because her teammates are saying that they're uncomfortable about her using the ladies' changing rooms because she's still got male genitals, and says that she's attracted to women, and are basically saying, well, she's lapping it up. We're all uncomfortable. She doesn't mind. I mean, it's madness, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, who knew that an autogynephile who pretends to be a woman and goes into women's changing rooms would actually be a little bit of a pervert? I mean, I think these are things that we know. It's preposterous that we don't know that. I mean, that Thomas has got the largest, broadest shoulders I've I've ever seen on a man, let alone on a woman. It's ridiculous. We've got to stop. And actually, look, there's always been chances. There's always been perverts. There's always been men that want to prey on women and get into women's spaces and do horrible things. But in this instance, the United States women authorities, whoever is condoning this, the buck stops with them, really. It's absolutely preposterous. But then you've got a United States government that is absolutely hell-bent on erasing all women's rights and really don't care about this sort of thing. So it's just no surprise.
Kelly J, thank you so much. I'll have to jump in and say that we're not calling Leah Thomas a pervert and suggesting that the trans community is in any way perverted. That was some strongly stated views there by Kelly J. Well, Benedict, what are your thoughts on this?
On which bit? Do you want me to talk about the swimmer or the books?
Let's actually look at the Equality and Human Rights Commission saying to Scotland, hold back, stop and think about this legislation. I mean, surely that's the right call.
I think actually caution is always good, because this is not so much of the trans debate is sort of framed in the language of prejudice and assuming that there are a lot of absolutes, when actually a lot of the sort of the scientific community around issues like transgenderism, around trans children, gender dysphoria, is actually in its very early stages. And that's the thing, there haven't been a great deal of studies that entirely prove one way or the other. There's actually a lot of sort of evidence that makes things sort of meet in the middle as to how it is that you should actually approach these things. But it's certainly the case, in my opinion, certainly when it comes to children, that caution is always the best format. And ultimately, if you are a trans woman, you ought to be able to empathise with other women, how they might feel, how they might feel unsafe in a changing room circumstances, for example. That's sort of one of the part and parcels of being a woman, is actually having to sort of live your life potentially under that threat your whole life. So there should be, as much as you might feel a little bit offended or something, there should, I think, at least be that empathy, rather than saying, no, you absolutely must acquiesce to my demands, saying, well, speaking as a woman, which is what I'm sort of presenting to the world, I ought to be a little bit more sympathetic that not everybody feels entirely comfortable with this.
I mean, it's quite astonishing that Stonewall have come out and said that they find the Equality and Human Rights Commission's report deeply troubling and anti-trans. I mean, where do they get the audacity to basically say the government-appointed body to uphold human rights doesn't know as well as they do?
Well, where do they get the audacity? Because if this is the route we all go down, Stonewall will start losing money. And that's ultimately what Stonewall exists to do, is to keep itself sort of self-sufficient, keep itself going. And that's very often the issue with a lot of these sort of charities, is that they have a sort of a goal, and perhaps the goal is very noble, as often, for example, gay rights, very much a noble goal. But once it sort of achieves that, and I'm not saying that, homophobia is eradicated or anything like that, but actually a lot of the goals about having gay people being accepted in society were met by Stonewall. It then has to move on to the next thing. It has to find a reason to keep going. That's where we currently are. And if there is pushback on whatever it is that it wants, then it's an existential threat. So whilst I don't agree with anything that Stonewall says on this topic, I can understand why they're reacting like this. This is their future that they're considering.
Yeah, my big concern actually is the toxicity of this debate will actually end up having a backlash on the trans community, many of whom, it seems to me, have just rubbed along quite nicely, got about with their daily lives, and now we've got these sort of rabid activism. It's not going to help them, is it, surely?
Yeah, you're right. It's not fair, I think, that very often LGBTQ issues, whatever it is, always pushes people, is something that encompasses all the people that sort of are part of these various communities. A lot of gay people, a lot of bisexual people, a lot of trans people, they just want to live their lives without being threatened, in much the same way as a lot of women and a lot of men would quite like to just live their lives without being threatened. Not everything has to become this sort of massive issue. I understand there is a lot of homophobia, there is a lot of transphobia and what have you. That does need to be addressed. But ultimately, this isn't a crusade. And it shouldn't be made into one, because, as you say, that only leads to negative outcomes, and that's not what anybody wants.
Indeed. Benedict, it's been an absolute delight having you on the programme today. You've got wisdom in all sorts of departments, it seems, so we'll definitely have you back. You have informed us all brilliantly. That's about it for now, I'm afraid. Join me again next week for We Need to Talk About. Same time, same place on GB News, 2 o'clock, of course. From Monday, coming up next, it's The Briefing with Arlene Foster, and I bet she's got a few thoughts on the latest twists and turns of Partygate, so stay tuned. First of all, though, it's time for the weather forecast. It's bye-bye from me. Have a glorious weekend, whatever you're doing, and I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
Hello again. It's been a pretty quiet January so far, but our weather is set to turn more unsettled as we head through this weekend. Through Friday, still got some sunshine around, but those skies clouding over and those winds turning stronger. And that's because this high pressure slides away and we see these tightening isobars starting to push their way in. So a wetter and windier picture of weather to come as we go through the next couple of days. Out there at the moment, though, we've got plenty of sunshine across eastern areas. The sky is turning a little bit hazy through the afternoon as we see that cloud pushing in from the west. But elsewhere, rather cloudy through much of the afternoon with some outbreaks of rain pushing in across the west of Scotland. The wind's beginning to pick up here, and that's a sign of things to come. Temperatures on the mild side, though, 11s and 12s under the cloud, 9 or 10 where we've got sunnier skies and some sunshine around through much of the day.